whispers behind the white robe. It begins in the Vatican's hushed marble corridors, where the air feels older than the tourists who wander through. Footsteps echo like the ticking of a clock that's been counting for centuries. Stained glass scatters light across polished floors. The Pope, the man in immaculate white, draws every eye, his presence like a living icon. But if you linger, if you listen, you might catch a different sound. A murmur passed between guards, archivists, even priests. They speak of a man few pilgrims ever notice. He wears no crown, carries no sceptre, and yet some insist his authority runs deeper than the Pope's. Dressed always in simple black, he moves quietly through offices and private chapels, avoiding cameras. He is the superior general of the Society of Jesus. In the public imagination, he is the Black Pope. The title, born centuries ago, isn't about dark sorcery, it's about contrast. White and black, light and shadow, the visible ruler and the invisible one. The Pope leads the Catholic world. The Black Pope, so the story goes, steers the helm from the shadows. In smoky 17th century taverns, in candlelit salons, whispers claimed the Jesuits were no mere priests. They were educators, explorers, confessors to kings, men with ears in every palace and eyes in every port. Bound by an oath of absolute obedience to the Pope, they seemed to answer to no one else. But in truth, their chain of command ran through one man, elected for life, feared by monarchs, courted by statesmen. A pamphlet from 1645 put it bluntly: the general of the Jesuits may be in Rome, yet his shadow falls on the New World by morning. Scholars still debate whether this was hyperbole or warning. Was the superior general truly pulling strings across continents, or had enemies of the order simply spun a tale too delicious to doubt? One curious detail: the Pope alone can remove the superior general, yet history remembers moments when popes seemed reluctant to cross him. Take Pope Innocent X, who, during a tense standoff with France, reportedly slowed key decisions to avoid Jesuit backlash. Coincidence? Careful strategy? Historians still argue. And that's where the intrigue lives, in the space between what is documented and what is believed. The Black Pope is not a villain from a spy novel, but a flesh and blood figure whose authority is real enough to inspire centuries of myth. The power may be spiritual, intellectual, and diplomatic rather than military, but perception is often more potent than any army. Today, conspiracy theorists have reimagined the role as part of vast, unseen networks controlling world affairs. But to understand why this story still grips imaginations, we must return to its origin, the birth of the Jesuits, and the soldier saint who forged them into an army of faith unlike any the world had seen. Birth of the Jesuit Order. The story begins far from Rome, in a world torn by both piety and bloodshed. It is 1521, and on the slopes of Pamplona in northern Spain, cannon smoke curls through the air. A young Basque nobleman named Inigo López de Loyola, better known to history as Ignatius of Loyola, stands at the front lines. He is no priest, he is a soldier, wrapped in armour and the heat of ambition. When a French cannonball shatters his leg, it also shatters the course of his life. Confined to bed for months, Loyola's days are filled not with strategy or wine, but with the only books at hand, tales of Christ and the saints. He begins to imagine a different kind of knighthood, one fought not with swords, but with faith as the weapon and the world as the battlefield. By the time he recovers, the soldier is gone. In his place is a pilgrim with a dangerous idea: to build an army of God unlike any that had come before. The timing could not have been more turbulent. The Reformation was tearing Europe in two, kings and princes were choosing sides, and the Catholic Church faced one of its gravest crises. While Luther's words spread across printing presses, Loyola was gathering companions, educated, disciplined men with a singular vow: absolute obedience to the Pope. Not just spiritual obedience, but readiness to go wherever he commanded, without delay, without excuse. In 1540, Pope Paul III officially approved the Society of Jesus. Unlike other orders, it had no monasteries to retreat into, no rigid timetable of cloistered prayer. The Jesuits were made for movement, missionaries, scholars, confessors, and political advisors, all under the watch of a single leader, the Superior General. This leader would live in Rome, but his reach would be global. One quirky fact often overlooked: the Jesuits embraced education as their battlefield strategy. By the end of the 16th century, they ran hundreds of schools and universities across Europe and beyond. These were not merely seminaries, they taught astronomy, mathematics, and languages alongside theology. A generation of rulers, diplomats, and merchants passed through Jesuit classrooms, often absorbing more than they realized. Scholars still debate whether Loyola envisioned this as a deliberate power structure, or whether it grew organically from the Jesuits' mission. What is clear is that this network gave the Superior General an invisible web of influence. Letters from Brazil, China, and India would arrive in Rome, each one a thread in the tapestry of a global operation. And with that reach came suspicion. To friends, the Jesuits were the Church's shock troops, defending the faith at its most fragile moment. To enemies, they were puppeteers with the Pope as figurehead. By the late 1500s, the nickname Black Pope had begun to circulate, a reflection of the order's leader's black cassock and the belief that his power rivaled the man in white. But if the title began as rumour, it would gain weight in the years ahead. Monarchs would feel their presence, popes would lean on their counsel, and soon the man in black would become both saviour and scapegoat in the political storms to come. The rise of the Superior General. By the mid-16th century, the Society of Jesus was no longer a daring experiment, it was a force. In less than a generation, Jesuits had stepped into royal courts, navigated jungles, and sailed to continents many Europeans still considered little more than names on a map. At the heart of it all sat a figure the public rarely saw: the Superior General. His title sounded almost military, and in many ways it was. The Superior General wasn't simply an administrator, he was the conductor of a worldwide orchestra, every Jesuit priest a note in his composition. From a modest residence in Rome, he directed operations through a steady stream of letters and envoys. In an age when news could take months to cross oceans, his correspondence carried instructions precise enough to dictate how a missionary should approach a foreign court, what books should be taught in a school, or even which political disputes to navigate or avoid. The first to hold the office, Ignatius of Loyola himself, set the tone. His successors would inherit not only his spiritual zeal but also his strategic vision. Claudio Acquaviva, the fifth Superior General, took that vision to unprecedented heights. Appointed in 1581, at just 38, he ruled for 34 years, longer than many popes. Under his leadership, the Jesuits became masters of subtle influence. One quirky detail that captures Acquaviva's character: he kept an internal manual, Industriae Pro Superioribus, that taught Jesuit leaders how to handle difficult personalities, win over opponents, and maintain unity in the ranks. It read like a cross between a spiritual guide and a Renaissance diplomacy handbook, proof that leadership, in his mind, was equal parts prayer and psychology. By now, the legend of the Black Pope was firmly taking shape. Kings and emperors sought Jesuit confessors not just for spiritual counsel, but for political advice. When Jesuits spoke, they spoke with the weight of Rome behind them, or so it seemed. Scholars still debate whether the Superior General truly dictated political outcomes, or whether monarchs simply projected that power onto him. Yet in an era where perception often mattered as much as reality, the belief itself was influence enough. In the courts of Europe, Whispers painted the superior general as a shadowy counterpart to the Pope, an equal in power, different in style. The Pope might bless armies, the Black Pope might guide the generals. The Pope crowned monarchs, the Black Pope supposedly told them how to keep their crowns. It wasn't only in Europe. In China, Jesuit astronomers served the Ming court, blending scientific precision with cultural diplomacy. In Japan, missionaries navigated the dangerous tides of the shogunate's suspicion. In South America, they built entire communities known as reducciones, where European and indigenous cultures intertwined under Jesuit oversight. Every success abroad was credited to, or blamed on, the man in black back in Rome. But influence, once noticed, draws scrutiny. Rivals in the church and secular governments alike began to watch the Jesuits with growing unease. How could one man, unelected by the public and unknown to most, wield such reach? The stage was set for confrontation, and the next act would see the Black Pope face some of the most powerful thrones and altars of his time. Clashes with thrones and altars. The 17th and 18th centuries were an age when crowns glittered, empires expanded, and thrones were rarely empty for long. But in the shadows of royal courts, the Jesuits, and by extension their superior general, found themselves walking a dangerous tightrope between influence and survival. They were trusted advisors to some monarchs, suspected conspirators to others. Every whisper of influence only sharpened the knives of their rivals. In France, the tension came to a head under King Louis XIV, the Sun King. Jesuits had long been close to the French court, advising queens, tutoring princes, and shaping policy from the confessional. But Louis's reign was also a theatre of intrigue, and enemies of the order accused them of meddling in matters far beyond the pulpit. When a Jesuit missionary in China argued for allowing certain Confucian rites among converts, a pragmatic step to win local acceptance, the decision reached Rome and caused an uproar. To critics, it was proof the Jesuits were bending doctrine to gain influence. Spain too had its battles with the society. Jesuits were powerful within the Spanish colonies, running missions that blended religious instruction with cultural preservation, especially in South America. These missions, or reducciones, often protected indigenous communities from exploitation by colonial settlers. Admirable to some, but to the powerful plantation owners and slave traders, it was a threat. The superior general's support for these missions made enemies in places where gold outweighed morality. One quirky but telling episode unfolded in Portugal. In 1750, a treaty between Spain and Portugal reshaped South American borders, and Jesuit missions were caught in the middle. When the Guarani people resisted being moved, Jesuits were accused of inciting rebellion. The accusation wasn't entirely fair. The assistance was as much about survival as faith, but it gave Portugal's Prime Minister, the Marquis of Pombal, the pretext he needed to expel the order from the country. Scholars still debate whether these expulsions were inevitable given the Jesuits' global prominence, or whether they could have avoided them with a less confrontational style. What's clear is that their combination of loyalty to the Pope and vast, self-directed network made monarchs uneasy. They were too international to be fully trusted by any single throne. Even popes could grow wary. In moments of political tension, the Jesuit superior general might find himself under suspicion from the very office he had sworn to serve. The irony was sharp. The order most famous for obedience to the Pope could, in the eyes of some, become the very rival to his authority. By the mid-18th century, the list of governments pushing back against the Jesuits had grown long. Portugal, France, Spain, Naples, each claimed their own reasons: political interference, economic obstruction, doctrinal disputes, but the outcome was the same. The Black Pope's network was being dismantled piece by piece. Yet history would prove that dismantling influence is far harder than dismantling buildings. The next chapter would see the most devastating blow in the Society's history, a papal decree that seemed to erase them entirely. And yet, like so many whispers in Vatican halls, the story of the Black Pope was not so easily silenced. The suppression that failed. In 1773, the unthinkable happened. A papal brief, Dominus ac Redemptor, issued by Pope Clement XIV, ordered the complete suppression of the Society of Jesus, not just in one kingdom or colony, everywhere. The Jesuit schools were to close, their missions abandoned, their properties seized. The document's tone was formal, almost surgical, but the impact was anything but. In an instant, the Superior General, at the time, Lorenzo Ricci, went from commander of a global network to a prisoner in the Castel Sant'Angelo in Rome. The reasons were as tangled as the politics of the age. The Bourbon monarchies, France, Spain and Naples, had been pressuring the Pope for years. They accused the Jesuits of political meddling, economic interference, even fostering rebellion in the colonies. To their courts, the Society's independence, its loyalty to the Pope over national rulers, was intolerable. By the time Clement XIV signed the decree, the Jesuits had been expelled from most Catholic kingdoms already. One quirky and little-remembered fact: not every Catholic ruler complied. In Protestant Prussia, Frederick the Great allowed Jesuit schools to continue operating, openly mocking the Pope's order. Catherine the Great of Russia did the same, reasoning that their educational skill was too valuable to lose. In these unlikely havens, the Black Pope's influence flickered on, even as the office itself officially ceased to exist. Scholars still debate whether Clement XIV acted out of conviction or desperation. Some argue he feared that defying the Bourbon monarchies could fracture the Church beyond repair. Others see it as a reluctant sacrifice, offering the Jesuits to appease powerful thrones. Whatever his motives, the result seemed final. The Society was gone, its leader in chains, its name stripped from official records. Lorenzo Ricci, steadfast to the end, refused to confess to any wrongdoing. From his prison cell, he wrote letters insisting the Society had served faithfully. He died there in 1775, never seeing his order restored. His death cemented him in Jesuit memory as a martyr of obedience, a man who suffered not for disobedience, but for loyalty. And yet, history has a way of undoing even the most decisive decrees. By the early 19th century, the political landscape of Europe had shifted. The French Revolution had toppled monarchies, Napoleonic wars had redrawn borders, and the Catholic Church found itself in need of capable, disciplined agents to navigate the new order. In 1814, Pope Pius VII formally restored the Society of Jesus. In a solemn ceremony at the Jesuit Church in Rome, the Black Pope's office was reborn. This resurrection was more than symbolic. The Jesuits returned to their schools, missions, and diplomatic work with renewed energy. The shadow that had seemed extinguished in 1773 was once again moving across continents, but the world they stepped back into was no longer the one they had left. It was modernizing, faster, more connected, and with this new world came a new kind of scrutiny, one that would follow the Black Pope into the modern era, modern shadows in the Vatican. The 20th century transformed the Vatican from a fortress of tradition into a state that had to contend with the cameras, headlines, and political storms of the modern world. Popes now addressed millions by radio and television. Journalists scrutinized every gesture, every policy. And yet, behind the glow of the papal balcony, the figure in black, the Superior General, remained largely unseen. In the early decades, Jesuits played a quiet but pivotal role in navigating this new era. Superior generals like Włodzimierz Ledochowski, who served from 1915 to 1942, guided the Society through 2 world wars and the rise of totalitarian regimes. Ledochovsky was known for his political shrewdness, a man who could speak in the polished language of diplomacy while moving with the discipline of a military strategist. During World War II, Jesuits in Europe found themselves split, some resisting Nazi occupation, others caught in collaboration by necessity or accusation. The Black Pope's influence was felt in the delicate balancing act of survival. One quirky example from this period involves Vatican radio. While the Pope's voice reached the faithful over the airwaves, Jesuit technicians and broadcasters quietly ran much of the operation. Messages crafted under the Superior General's knowledge or approval could pass in coded form to resistance groups, all under the guise of religious programming. Scholars still debate whether this was an organized network or a series of independent efforts by Jesuit members, but the effect was undeniable. The post-war years brought new challenges: decolonization, the Cold War, and the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, which reshaped the Church's relationship with the modern world. Superior General Pedro Arrupe became a towering figure in this transformation. A former missionary in Japan who had survived the Hiroshima bombing, Arrupe pushed the Jesuits towards social justice, education for the poor, and direct engagement with political issues. This earned admiration from reformers and suspicion from conservatives, who saw it as political overreach. The very structure that had made the Jesuits so effective in the 16th century, their international reach, their adaptability, their loyalty to the Pope, yet independence in daily operations, continued to fuel the mystique of the Black Pope. Rumours claimed Arrupe could influence Vatican decisions from behind the scenes, that Jesuit thinkers quietly shaped speeches and policy. Supporters called it collaboration. Critics called it manipulation. In the media age, secrecy itself became a kind of currency. The less the public saw of the Superior General, the more they imagined. Even now, Vatican watchers note that Jesuits often hold key advisory posts, especially in theology, diplomacy, and education. While the Pope may appear before the world, the Black Pope is more often found in meeting rooms, behind heavy wooden doors, speaking to those who speak to the Pope. Yet, for all the suspicion, the modern era has also softened some of the old tensions. The Jesuits' focus on humanitarian work, refugee aid, and global education has earned them a different kind of respect. Still, the mystique remains, a quiet reminder that even in an age of transparency, there are places where influence lives out of sight. And as the 21st century dawned, the legend of the Black Pope would take a new twist. For the first time in history, the man in white and the man in black would both be Jesuits. Secrets, myths, and the Black Pope legend. The phrase Black Pope has always carried more drama than doctrine. In the popular imagination, it conjures images of secret councils in candle-lit rooms, coded messages in ancient vaults, and a figure who can tilt the course of nations with a whisper. The reality is more complex, and perhaps more intriguing precisely because of that gap between myth and fact. The legend draws power from the Jesuits' unique DNA. From their founding, they combined fierce loyalty to the Pope with a worldwide operational network that could act swiftly and decisively. To outsiders, this looked like the perfect setup for covert power. That suspicion was amplified by the order's discretion. Jesuits were not in the habit of broadcasting their strategies. A pope's actions might be recorded in the public square, but the Superior General's influence often left no trace beyond the decisions themselves. One quirky tale from the 19th century tells of a British newspaper that, during debates over Catholic emancipation, published a satirical leak of supposed Jesuit world domination plans. It was pure fabrication, but it sold papers, cementing in the public mind the idea of Jesuits as master conspirators. Similar fabrications found their way into pulp novels, anti-Catholic tracts, and even stage plays, where the Black Pope was painted as a shadowy mastermind. Scholars still debate whether such conspiracy theories arose mainly from prejudice against Catholicism in Protestant-majority countries, or whether real political interventions by Jesuits occasionally fed the fire. The truth likely lies in between. An organisation this well-connected inevitably crossed into political spheres, and enemies were quick to magnify every action into proof of secret control. The Black Pope myth also thrives because it fits a narrative people want to believe, that behind the visible stage of global religion lies another layer, a backstage where real decisions are made. The title itself sounds cinematic, inviting speculation even when the facts are far more ordinary. A meeting about education policy becomes, in the telling, a covert briefing. A theological paper is reimagined as coded instruction. Ironically, the Jesuits have sometimes benefited from the legend. The aura of mystery can draw attention, lend weight to their work, and even deter political adversaries who think twice before crossing an organisation they half believe to be omnipresent. At other times, it has been a liability, fueling suspicion that has led to expulsion, suppression, or political attack. In recent decades, the myth has evolved with the times. Modern conspiracy culture has woven the Black Pope into narratives about globalist plots, new world orders, and hidden alliances between religious and political elites. Some of these theories stretch far beyond plausibility, linking the Superior General to events and decisions in which he played no part. Yet, the persistence of such ideas says less about the Jesuits themselves than about the human appetite for hidden explanations. And so the legend endures, part truth, part imagination, part mirror, reflecting whatever fears and fascinations an era brings. But to see how it plays out today, we must step into the present, where the current Superior General operates in a Vatican unlike any his predecessors ever knew, and where his influence, though quieter, is no less intriguing. The man behind the curtain today. In the modern Vatican, the role of the Superior General is less about commanding secret armies and more about guiding an immense, decentralized organization across more than 100 countries. Yet, the weight of history ensures that the title Black Pope still follows whoever occupies the post. Since 2016, that man has been Arturo Sosa, a Venezuelan scholar and former university rector whose calm manner and academic background stand in quiet contrast to the myths that swirl around his office. Sosa's election came at a time of deep transition for the Church. Pope Francis, himself the first Jesuit pope in history, was already reshaping the papacy with his emphasis on humility, social justice, and pastoral outreach. For the first time, the man in white and the man in black shared not only a religious order, but a philosophical vision. To some, this erased the old image of rivalry. To others, it was the ultimate consolidation of Jesuit influence. One quirky observation Vatican watchers make: Sosa is the first Superior General from Latin America, a region where the Jesuits have long been deeply involved in education and advocacy for the poor. His speeches often focus on migration, inequality, and environmental responsibility, themes far removed from the cloak and dagger intrigue of earlier centuries, but still capable of shaping global Catholic priorities. When the Pope speaks on these issues, some imagine the quiet echo of the Black Pope's counsel behind the words. Scholars still debate how much direct influence the Superior General can truly wield in today's Vatican. The Church's governance is more transparent than in the Renaissance, and power is dispersed among numerous offices and commissions. Yet the Jesuits' vast network of schools, universities, parishes, and social projects means that their priorities inevitably ripple outward. In many ways, the Black Pope's reach is less about immediate political manoeuvres and more about shaping the minds of future leaders, much as it was in the 16th century. Sosa himself downplays the myth. In interviews, he has called the Black Pope label a misunderstanding, insisting that the Jesuits serve in collaboration with the wider church, not in competition with it. And yet, the very act of denying the legend seems only to keep it alive. In the public mind, every denial is another breadcrumb in a centuries-old trail of intrigue. Today's Superior General operates in a world where information travels instantly, where rumours spread across social media in minutes rather than months. The shadows he walks in are no longer the marble corridors of Renaissance Rome, but the subtler, less visible spaces where global policy, theology and education intersect. His power is quieter, his stage larger, his audience, whether they know it or not, far wider. And so the story of the Black Pope continues, no longer the fearsome spectre of the Counter-Reformation, yet still a figure of fascination. The man in black remains, as ever, just out of sight, close enough to feel present, distant enough to keep us wondering. Conclusion. For nearly 5 centuries, the office of the Superior General has been shaped by history, politics, and the stubborn endurance of legend. From a wounded soldier's vision in 1540 to the modern halls of the Vatican, the Black Pope has stood at the crossroads of faith and influence. The myths have shifted with each century, bending to the fears and fantasies of their time, yet the fascination endures. Whether as educator, diplomat, or supposed puppet master, the man in black has always been more than his title. He is a reminder that in the grand theatre of history, the most enduring figures are often those who speak softly, move carefully, and leave just enough unsaid to let the whispers grow